all for coming to this breakout session. I am pleased to introduce to you Andrew Monroe. He went to Auburn, but we've forgiven him for his bachelor's degree. He came to the University of Alabama to get his master's and stayed with us for a bit at the Youth Services Institute, left us, and has since returned home. Nothing else compares to home. But he is an amazing therapist, and I am so happy to have him back, being the therapist for this program. And Janie Plaxco, sitting over here. She has been serving the Tuscaloosa County, Tuscaloosa area for over 30 years, serving our kids who have histories of trauma, who have great needs, often in just scrambling, trying to figure out how to get what this child needs. And she has graciously agreed to work with Andrew in MAP's program as we try to pilot this program to inform the work that we do across the state. So, with no more ado, I will hold this up. Andrew and Janie, thank you so much.
So yes, I'm Andrew Monroe. Thank you for the introduction. Just a real quick question. Who's from the Tuscaloosa area? Most people. Where are some of the other areas people are from? Birmingham? Birmingham. Anywhere beyond Birmingham and Tuscaloosa? Mobile. Okay. So we got Mobile, Jefferson County, Tuscaloosa County. What I was asking for people that came in a little late, is anyone from another county beyond those? Coleman County? Perry County? Hale? Okay. So my program, this is another downer. I'm in Tuscaloosa County. However, we do have another program that reaches a little bit further beyond that. We have a therapist up in the Madison County area, but she does cover the Coleman area, that whole section of the state. We have another therapist in a different program in the Tuscaloosa area that does kind of cover that Hale, Bibb County kind of area. Mobile, we don't have anyone, but there is a program down there that works with this population. As Mandy said, I did do my master's in Tuscaloosa. To my wife's chagrin, I came back to Tuscaloosa. We met at Auburn, so she's kind of working through that. But kind of give you a background, I worked at the same agency that Funda worked at in my middle period before I came back here. So I've had a little bit of experience both sides of this. I've dealt with kids with problematic sexual behaviors here at this time and the first time I was with Youth Services Institute. And in the middle, I worked specifically with kid survivors of trauma, specifically children, at a domestic violence agency. So today, I always try to start out with an outline. I do the same thing with my kids. I always let people know what they're getting themselves into. As I warned them, I'm not used to talking for an hour and 15. I'm more of a 50-minute session kind of guy. So we'll see how long I can go. What we're going to start out with is we're going to do a definition of problematic sexual behaviors. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of information of what the difference between normative and problematic sexual behaviors are. We'll talk about the prevalence, how big this population is, what that population looks like, what are treatment options, our program and our similar programs. With my program, we have a specific partnership with the Tuscaloosa Children's Center, so Janie will come and discuss a little bit of that. We'll answer questions. I did put a possible bonus round in there if we have time, because I am used to the 50 minutes, so maybe that'll give me the 15. Part of our program deals with TFCBT. I'm a certified provider in that as well as ours, and both models kind of conjoint depending on the kid. So the first thing we're going to talk about though is a definition. The reason why we have to talk about a definition is people have been doing research in this area for years and years with different definitions. So we're trying to make it more specific, so we can have the same definition going across the board so we can look at the data at the same level. So the definition for problematic sexual behaviors, it still is a little bit vague, but it does give us some. It's developmentally inappropriate and potentially harmful behaviors involving sexual body parts. And then we use the definition of illegal sexual behaviors, which are sexual behaviors in older youth, usually 13 or above, depending on the law, that is illegal under the state law. So majority of the problematic sexual behaviors that we see transfer into illegal sexual behaviors based off of the child's age. So what's typical sexual play? Even though my parents don't like to hear it, there is some normative play for kids that's specific to sexual actions. What that tends to kind of fall into categories is exploratory. It's spontaneous, so it tends to not just, there's no plan to it, it just kind of happens for kids of similar ages, similar sizes, similar developmental abilities. It's by mutual agreement, so there is agreement upon them. A lot of times it'll be something similar to playing doctor of the same age. Usually it tends to happen in kids that are below school level at that. And once kids get to school level, it tends to kind of dissipate to a degree. Also, it's not accompanied by anger, fear, or strong anxiety. There's no real strong emotions to it. And part of that is because it's by mutual agreement. So if both kids are agreeing to it, some of those extreme emotions don't occur. On the flip side, most of those things on the flip side tend to be problematic sexual behaviors. What we're going to talk about is just a few different categories. High frequency for a lot of kids can be problematic. What I'll see in some of my kids is maybe an extreme amount of masturbation where it's unhealthy and it can harm a kid. Also, the occurrences of breaking other kids' boundaries is on a consistent basis. Excludes normal childhood activities. Like I said, doctor, mom and dad tend to be some ways that we see kids having some sexual exploration that can be deemed normal depending on the situation, but outside of those kind of normal activities that we see kids do. Unresponsible to typical parent strategies. A huge number of kids that have some type of sexual behavior, once it's addressed by parents and parents supervised, it tends to go away. But once it becomes problematic once they've had some of those sanctions and they continue to do it. Occurs between youth, significantly divergent ages and developmental abilities. What we're seeing a lot of now is developmental ability issues. We'll have kids who are on one developmental level having problematic sexual behaviors with kids on the same developmental ability but at different ages. So a kid may be 15 or 16 but developmentally they're at a much younger age and they're having problems. So we're having to try to work on that to figure out what we need to do with those kids and make sure that they get the help they need. Once it becomes problematic though, is we do have a lot of kids who are, there's a large age gap with their victims. So behaviors interfere with social development. Like I said a minute ago, dealing with like masturbation, public exposure, things like that. It kind of halts the ability to have those normal social interactions. Also with kids that are, to have problematic sexual behaviors, you're breaking some sort of boundary. So for a lot of kids that are consistently breaking those boundaries, it makes it difficult to have those social developments. Intrusive behaviors kind of go with that too. Kids, as they get a little older, start to learn those boundaries, okay? I remember when I was working at my last place, we'd even get a hula hoop out and say, okay, this is your personal space. This is yours, that's their personal space, and we're not supposed to break that. Kids learn that at a fairly young age, but when it becomes problematic is when they keep breaking those boundaries over and over again. Includes force or intimidation or coercion. That's kind of the flip side of what's normal is when kids force or intimidate, that becomes problematic because there's a power struggle there. For it to be normative, it does have to have that mutual agreed upon. And it elicits strong negative emotions like fear, anxiety in the other child. If it's normative, they tend not to have any negative feelings about it because it was mutually agreed upon. But in this situation, the victim usually has that strong fear-like symptoms. So prevalence. The other thing as being a child therapist is I believe in positive reinforcement, so I brought a bag of candy. So I just want to see what people think. How large do you think what's the prevalence of this group in our society? And I'm going to hand out candy whether you guess it right or wrong. Anybody want to go?
95%.
95%. Okay.
I'm gonna say 99.9, but, you know.
You get the first
I
pick.
decided,
What do you want?
Stacey? We need peanuts.
You need peanuts? 30%? Something like that work. I'm gonna hand out candy too. What'd you say? One out of three? Okay. So 33%, does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Who else wants candy?
I want candy.
What's your guess, sir?
I'm gonna guess about 90.
95%?
I'm gonna say about 50%.
50%?
Now, you
Let's
can
see
give
if I
me
Thank you. I deserve another one, I didn't ask.
Do you mind handing out some candy?
Okay.
Anybody want some?
I've been doing this longer than Andrew, and I don't hand out this good candy.
Well, I luck out every once in a while. So the reality is that our numbers are really skewed. We don't know. For various reasons, different policies and procedures of certain agencies kind of neglect that, but also depending on the age. When we talked about the difference in the definitions, is usually kids 13, maybe a little older and under, tend not to go to juvenile justice, which are at best the numbers that we have. In a lot of places, we don't even get those numbers. So just keep that in mind. These are super conservative numbers. And they're from 2004, so 14 years ago, that's the best we have right now. An approximate 89,000 juvenile sex offenders were known to the police through the U.S. Adolescents account for 17% of arrests for all sex crimes annually, and 30%, I think that was you that said that, of child sexual abuse is committed by adolescents. And like I said, remember these numbers tend to be fairly small, and like I said, for multiple reasons.
Can I add something here?
Yes, ma'am.
Before Andrew and this program came to Tuscaloosa, I've at the Children's Center for 23 years, and we have a multidisciplinary team that meets to staff cases of sexual abuse that comes to DHR. And we were getting bombarded with children that were under 13, and there was nothing for them. DHR, they're considered prevention, so you can't really, DHR couldn't make them do anything. Kids couldn't come to our center if they are the children with the problematic sexual behavior, which we used to call offenders. They couldn't go through the juvenile justice system because they were too young, so they were basically getting zero. And there were a lot of kids that have come through that did not fit in this.
And that's a part of what we're going to talk about as we go with our program. One of the key things that we were trying to solve as much as we can. So this kind of gives us an idea of the number of kids. Like I said, it's really conservative and kind of outdated information. But what I want to think about next is what we're looking at changing the way that we talk about these kids. But what are some of the words that y'all have heard kind of associated with kids with problematic sexual behaviors? And I can kind of start that off. Well, the word that we've used in the past is juvenile sex offender. Tends to be a fairly common word, so you can kind of use that to think, well, what are some of the things that y'all associate with words like that, or other words with kids with problematic sexual behaviors?
We've seen it at home somewhere.
Okay, so there's an experience that they've done that before, okay? What else?
Predator.
Predator, yeah. So we get a lot of that, monster, things like that. Other words anyone can think of? Yeah, if they want candy, you can hand them out candy.
Predator?
And we're handing out candy, that's not what we're, that's the city, whatever.
I'm giving you a lot because I love you.
So what are some other words that we can think of?
It's one-dimensional.
One-dimensional, so we're just looking at it from one side. Awesome, thank you. Anything else that we can think of? Okay. So I found, I can't remember what these things are called, like word salad or whatever. And looking at the information that we have out there and the opinions we have out there, these are some of the majority of the words that we hear when we think of either juvenile or adult sex offenders. Obviously, the big ones, male, we see words like scary, creepy. There's some really strange ones I was looking at last night, like Florida's over here. I'm not sure what we have to do with Florida. But you have things like ick, prison, mental illness, weapons, asshole, pedophile, rapist. These are a lot of really negative terms that we're using. Dangerous, child abuser, criminal, lifelong punishment. I'll give a shout out to us, social workers over there. But a large number of these words that we associate with this population tend to be very negative and aggressive style words. And so what we're doing is we're trying to change some of that language. And part of that is we're using the words like child with problematic sexual behavior, adolescents with illegal sexual behaviors, because studies are starting to come out that if we use juvenile sex offender, a large amount of the population just hears sex offender. And when people hear sex offender, the majority of people kind of get a gut reaction to that. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we have these people in our community. Let's ship them off somewhere in the middle of nowhere and just let them rot. That tends to be the gut reaction a lot of people have. So what we're trying to make sure is that we define them as accurately as possible. My professional opinion is the majority of the kids we see, it really is a problematic behavior. And when you have that opinion, it means that there's some level of the ability to change. What we're seeing is that if we go with the words like sex offender, stuff like that, you want to just admit, you want to look at it more of an adult view, like this can't be helped, this can't be fixed, there's cycles there. This is just a problem that'll keep going. There's no solution to it. With this wordage, we make it important to remember that these are children, they are adolescents. These are the kids that'll be moving up in the system if we don't do something to make sure that we're making some change. Okay, so, let's start. Okay, just want to make sure.
Try not to interrupt.
Okay, I got you. So, with children, that kind of reminds us who we're really talking about. And when we use this developmentally sensitive wordage, we're starting to see that kids are getting, I would guess to say fairer deals is probably the best way to think about it. I know here in Tuscaloosa we do a wonderful job of making sure that kids get the help that they need, but in other situations around the state and around the country, if you're still using the juvenile sex offender kind of terms, they're not getting the deals and the treatment that they need. As I said, it focuses on the behavior, and from our opinion, with those behaviors, we can make some changes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I agree with what you just said. Now, because we do work with other states as well on a national level.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that there are some states that do a really good job. I'm gonna keep talking it out.
No, you can keep talking, because I told you, I only got 50 minutes. That's the only way I know how to work.
No, what my question is, because I know what some states do, and I am very aware of what our state does, and we're trying hard to improve, but we're not there. You said Tuscaloosa does a really good job.
Yes, ma'am.
So, are you going to elaborate on that at some
I
point?
will elaborate on some of it, but I can kind of give you kind of like the front page of it, if you will. What we do is we, as the Youth Service Institute, have a partnership with
You're with
Tuscaloosa
Youth
County.
Services?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So we have a similar partnership up in Coleman. That's
Yeah.
right. That's the right place. You said it earlier. See, and I have a good memory. But we have a partnership with the juvenile courts in the
Yeah.
state, in the areas that we work with. Because for people that are looking on the outside, you see a juvenile justice system that for some reason we believe is really broken. But when we look at the people that we're actually working with face to face, a large number of them they understand the kids that we're working with, juvenile probation officers, district attorneys, juvenile court judges. They see that these kids are there, they have issues, they want to do as much as they can to make sure that that kid gets help, the community's safe. And what they're doing is they're just it's kind of like the representative said earlier, they have a problem in front of them and they're trying to get as many resources as they can.
So what do you do in Tuscaloosa that's better than what we offer in some of the other counties?
I will talk about that
Okay.
further on. Yeah,
Okay.
that's part of the
That's what I wanted.
innovativeness of our program.
Okay.
And the hope is we'll extend that farther along. And part of it deals with our partnership with the Tuscaloosa Children's Center and making sure. But I'll get to that in just
Does CAC?
yeah, the CAC
Okay.
here. All right. So what I'm going to talk about first before we really talk about what this group looks like is a couple of statistics showing that the ages that we see kind of spikes in our ages of offenders. What we see is that when a kid starts to get to about the age of 10, there's a huge increase of kids having offenses. Part of the argument some places have is puberty is in that area, and we kind of get to a peak around 14 or 15 and kind of have a trend back down. Which part of our program is dealing with kids 9 to 14, and I'll talk more about that later, but that's kind of where we see those numbers spike. This is another statistic, but kind of shows a similar thing. We see an upward trend at the age of 10, and it kind of levels off. And especially when the victim's older than 12. But we do see that if a kid doesn't start to get treatment, there is a tendency to go back up if they get to adults. So what we're trying to explain is that I have people come in with misconceptions of what our kids look like. As the word before, we think that all the people that have problematic sexual behaviors are boys. What we see is there's a mix between boys and girls. Studies are starting to show that there's actually the younger kind of preschool area of problematic sexual behaviors, there's a higher percentage that are girls. And then it does this switch when they get to school age, and it starts to increase boys being the majority of the issues that we have. We have kids from all ages. As I said, it kind of peaks 12 to 14, but we do kind of see that start going up around 10. An important thing is that I also get asked, well, like, is there a specific group? Like, is it all African Americans, or is it all whites, or is it all Hispanics? And the reality is this is an issue that we see across all spectrums. There's no specific culture, there's no specific ethnicity, no specific race, no specific socioeconomic status that this happens in. It kind of happens across the board. Some of the other issues that we see that these children have, kind of comorbid issues, a large number of them tend to have other behavior issues. Partly a problematic sexual behavior is one of those behavior issues, but we'll see a lot of kids with ODD diagnosis. We do actually have a large number of kids that will have an ADHD diagnosis. Some of the research is arguing that that's an impulsivity issue because a large number of the kids, it's a situational impulsivity. Something leads itself to happen and they can't prevent themselves from acting on it. So they're impulsive. We do have a huge number of kids that have some sort of trauma background. I mean, you saw the percentages that Funda was talking about earlier. A huge part of our culture has some sort of traumatic experiences. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because part of our program does provide trauma services if our kids need it. Levels of anxiety and sadness, learning and language delays. As I talked about a few minutes ago, we are seeing an increase in older kids with cognitive delays being referred to us, where they may be 15 or 16 chronologically, but their cognitive levels may be 8 or 9. And how we're working with that, and we're trying to work through some ideas of how to really deal with those kids. Relationship issues, parent or caregiver stressors. One of those things that we know is that if parents are having to work multiple jobs or always stressed out, there's usually a lack of supervision for the kids. And with a lack of supervision, that's one thing that we see kids having to, it leads them to not having that support, that when something does happen, there's an instant kind of sanction on them. So if they don't have that supervision, they may keep doing it. Social relationships. I have parents who want to think that they're the #1 person in my kid's life, that they're going to listen to everything they say, and I usually have to be the one that breaks it to them and lets them know that it's the 5 or 6 bad kids that they're hanging out with school is who they really care about listening to. Some of my parents still don't believe me about that, but it's just the truth. Kids, when they get to the puberty age, they just start caring about what their peers say. So there is a chunk of the kids that we see that somewhat their peers kind of made an impact on what decisions they made, lead them down a path that they ideally shouldn't be down. So that kind of gives us an idea of what our group looks like. The important part of this is that we're trying to break the idea that there's just this one group of kids that have these issues, that is across the spectrum. So now we're going to talk a little bit about treatment options. Sorry, I walk back and forth. I'm a child therapist, so I do a lot of like playing in my office, I guess is the best way to argue. So like for me, conferences, I'm better to be up here because I at least can walk around. It's hard for me to sit. So what we're going to talk about is treatment options. So far, we've gotten through the fact that we have this population that tends to be fairly large. We know what the problems are, what that can be, but now we have to have some solutions, which is part of what this conference is about, is knowing those treatment options. I've broken them down kind of simply. I may try to write it a little bit better because it doesn't make, I realized as I was looking over it doesn't really make sense. So I kind of break it down in 2 big boxes. So we have like outpatient treatment, and then we have inpatient treatment, which kind of breaks it down. Who here works in outpatient treatment? Okay, who works in inpatient treatment? Who doesn't do either? There are a lot of people that didn't raise their hand. So we're going to split it up in these 2 boxes. And some of this is kind of simplifying it, but just to get an idea of the treatment options. And what I want to do is, what I'm hoping, one of the big things is that you'll have some resources when you leave here. Some of the pamphlets there can be stuff that you use with your kids, but also I want you to know the other resources that are available here. I've broken down kind of residential treatment to kind of areas. One's juvenile justice. There are a lot of kids that end up in the juvenile justice inpatient treatment facilities. The major inpatient facility for children with problematic sexual behaviors that end up in juvenile justice is at Mountain Megs. They have what they call the accountability-based sex offender program, and it's a residential program that they complete, and then they have to do some follow-up treatment once they get back into the community. They also have beds that they use. Is it Safety Net, Shannon? What's the other? Sequel? Isn't that who has the
It's
information?
not an absolute approved program, but we have set
They,
this to see.
okay. Right. And one thing that she did say is that they do have to be approved by the state to have a sex offender specific program. I don't use a whole lot of that language. We do have some mental health agencies in the state that do it. Sequel has beds for juvenile justice. They, we have the Phoenix program in Birmingham that sees kids, and I'm thinking, I think there may be one more, but I can't
Alabama
remember.
Clinical Schools.
Alabama Clinical Schools, yes, exactly.
Not our kids.
No, I was talking about mental health kids, yes, ma'am. So with outpatient, I've kind of broken it down into individual, family, and group. Ours is one of our programs, the continuum of care tends to do mostly individual treatment, where they'll see the kid for an hour a week, work on different strategies. Other people that are approved through ABSOP will see kids on that kind of basis. The program I'm going to talk about tends to be more family therapy, where you're working with both the kids and the parents. Then there's a group therapy model. We do a lot of work with Oklahoma University's Health Science Center, and they do a group therapy model where both parents and children come in. The kids go into a special group, work on the things that they're supposed to, and parents kind of use it as a support group, and then also to learn some new activities to help them at home. So that's kind of the breakdown of them. What we've seen is there's some key things to have in a treatment model that works best for kids. The first one that we talk about is parenting and behavior training. That's one that most people, once you really think about it, it's like, no kidding. Because for us, we work with the kids 1 hour a week. So if we can give them someone who's within their household that can help kind of make those behavior management changes throughout the week, of course that's going to be beneficial for the kids, and it's going to be the most consistent way to make sure that they're getting help. So a chunk of what we're seeing as effective practice is those parents getting those behavior management strategies, kind of role playing them and meeting with a therapist, kind of going over the pros and the cons of how this may work. They go home, they try that strategy, they come back, kind of check in, say, okay, that didn't work, let's go for someone else, or hey, that worked great, so let's keep doing that. So we're seeing that as effective. Learning rules about sexual behaviors and boundaries. The important part is teaching the parents, because of that consistency. If they only hear it from me an hour a week, but there was somebody else the rest of the week that's not kind of reinforcing that, it's really kind of hard to start making that change in behavior. As we know, in trying to change behaviors, it's that consistency, making sure that they're hearing it from multiple aspects of their lives, more of a holistic approach. Explain abuse prevention. Part of that is supervision. For a large number of the kids that we see, there's some level of supervision missing. Parents are maybe letting them go do things without really knowing what they're doing over here. So just including parents in what abuse prevention looks like. Also, statistics show that our kids with problematic sexual behaviors, usually due to their problems with boundaries, is they're more likely to be abused in the future. Sex education, that's a fun one to talk about in the Deep South, but we talk to parents about it, the importance of it. Part of it is that a large number of the parents that we talk about, they're like, yeah, well, I said, do you know about the birds and the bees? And he said yes, so I'm done. So we have to explain that that's not really what we need to be doing. What we need to be doing is having a real conversation, making sure that our kids have accurate information, because I've heard more times than I'd like to admit that, well, I Googled it, so that must be true. So I have to explain to my kids that Google doesn't have all the answers for everything on this road. Or better yet, well, my buddy said that it worked. And I've heard some scary things come out of prevention, contraception myths out there. But so we talked to parents first about the importance of sexual education. There's a component of it that deals with abuse prevention, because if kids don't have those anatomically correct names for things, if they're using these kind of strange words for their penis or their vagina, sometimes it makes it difficult, if something does happen to them, for people to prosecute. When you use some of those weird language, it kind of gets hard for investigators and forensic interviewers to kind of go through that stuff. So we make sure that they know anatomically correct words. Depending on age, we use different techniques to kind of go over what sex education is and make sure that they kind of understand the basic concepts. Another thing that we see here is kids are curious, kids want to know information, and they're going to find some information one way or the other. And so we want to make sure that it's coming from an accurate source, not from the internet. Tends to be an issue that we see because you type sex in the internet, I can guarantee you the first thing that pops up is not a reliable source about proper sex education. I can almost guarantee it's going to be some site, some pornography site, something like that, where they are going to learn things that may not be accurate, realistic, and can lead to these issues. Which is another thing that we're seeing is kids are getting some of their information from pornography websites. So some of the aggressive behaviors that they see on videos can kind of transition into their actual life. The most effective child component that we're seeing is self-control skills. As I kind of alluded to earlier, a large number of the kids tend to have impulse control issues. So trying to help them slow down enough to make those decisions is a big part of what we do. We kind of drill it into their heads that we need to give ourselves an extra second or two, because kids want to make those snap decisions and they just want to keep going. They don't really think about consequences, don't think about outcomes, they just do, and they keep going and going and going, and now down a wrong path they've gone. So what we try to do is give them some ways to control themselves, because this is also a behavior. What we're doing is we're trying to modify that behavior and make sure that they can control it. And one of the important things that we're hoping is that we can see that they're able to control these kind of behaviors before they leave our program, to make sure that they're safe in the community and the community is safe as well. A big thing, and kind of one of my soapbox issues, is one of the things that we know doesn't work is stuff that comes from adult sex offender programs. The original thought in our area was, like many places, well, if it works for adults, it works for kids. And none of that is true. What it took way too long to figure out for us is that, hey, kids are nothing like adults. Adolescents are this other weird population out there. We need something that looks for kids. We also need something that looks a little different for adolescents, and adults are over here. I don't deal with adults, so I just imagine them over here somewhere. But we see that we have to actually make programs specific to these kids. Instead of kind of taking pieces. I remember when I first started with YSI, we were talking about cycles and we were talking about these different parts, and for the majority of kids what we see is there's not really a cycle component, but that was something that we got from adults. We just saw this and we just assumed that if that's what happens for adults, it happens for kids. And what we're now realizing is that that doesn't occur. So this is just kind of going to give an idea of some of the recidivism rates that we've seen. This is a study that doesn't include any of our kids. It's out of Oklahoma. And what it is it's a 10-year follow-up study, and the importance is it's the longest study that we have for this population. There's not a huge amount of funds out there for this population to do research and look at those long-term studies. So it's our longest one, and what they looked at is they looked at 3 different groups. They have a comparison group that had just disruptive behaviors at their clinic. They used a play therapy model, and they used a CBT group therapy model, which is similar to what we're using now. All kids were similar age and race. However, the comparison group was more likely to be male. So what they did is they just kept checking in every so often to see. They looked at databases to identify kids that had any more situations with either juvenile court or adult court and dealing with sex offenses specific. And what they found is that the reoccurrence that they had for the CBT group, which is similar to our models, they only had a 2% reoccurrence, which means 98% of the kids that were in that group didn't go on to commit another problematic sexual behavior offense. I was talking to someone yesterday about this, and for me, I know that number's high. The studies that we've done, the woman that kind of introduced me, she just did a study last year, and her data showing more like a 5% reoccurrence rate, but we're still at 95%. The numbers in the statistics kind of range somewhere from 10 to 2, somewhere in that
Who
age
did
range.
this study?
This study was done by, I can back it up for you, and it's in your handouts. That is the person's study that
Who
we've
did
done.
this
Yes,
particular
ma'am.
study?
And if you look up them, Chafin and Solosky have done a large number of the studies in this population. And Solosky is actually one of the people that worked to develop the program that we're using. But I was talking to someone yesterday about it, and I was like, if I could just get medications that have like a 98% effect rating, that'd be awesome, because most of mine just set at 50-50. So we're looking at that. MAPS is the name of our program. It's the Multidisciplinary Abuse Prevention Services. This is the treatment model that we're looking at. We got a pilot grant from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. What it's specific to is the kids between the ages of 9 and 14. And there's parts of it that make it really innovative. We're using evidence-based treatment. For a long time, we've just kind of patchwork things together in the field, not us as a group. But what we're pushing, like most fields are, is evidence-based treatment. We want to make sure that these things are working. There's research out there to support it, because we want to make sure that we're not only helping our kids, but we're keeping the community safe as much as possible. The grant as a whole had to have some community collaboration, including being a member of the multidisciplinary team at the local child advocacy center. Active involvement. As we saw with what effectively works in treatment is parent interaction, making sure parents are involved, parents are helping make sure that those behavior modifications are occurring at home. That's one component. A big thing that we've not done in the past that we are doing is through a partnership with Tuscaloosa Children's Center, and I'll have Jane come up in just a few minutes, is we have more knowledge of what's going on with the victim. For years and years, we were kind of split up. Like, I work over here with a kid with problematic sexual behaviors, and then someone else, I assume, works with a victim, and that's kind of how we had it. And I know from talking to Jamie and other providers, that was kind of their side too. It's like, I work with the victim, and I'm assuming that hopefully the child with problematic sexual behaviors needs help. But we didn't really know what was going on. So now what we're looking at is collaborations to make sure that we know everybody's getting help. Because our ultimate goal at the end of the day is to make sure all kids are as safe as possible. So kind of what makes us a little different and kind of more specific to our program, as I said, we're a pilot project. We do work with Oklahoma University's Health Science Center, who's done a lot of research in this field over the last 20, 30 years. We have monthly calls with them. The model that I use, I had to go through certification process, filming sessions, making sure that I was doing everything I was supposed to get certified in the model. We do assessments and treatment for kids 9 to 14. Unfortunately for people outside of Tuscaloosa, my program's only in Tuscaloosa County. Ideally, part of the pilot project is hopefully we can push it to our other counties that we see kids in. And my rose-colored glasses have all the kids of the state of Alabama. Eventually, my supervisor's back there, so I just have to put in my plug, that the whole state is able to use this kind of program, because I do think that it really works. It's family-focused. Individual therapy that we've seen in the past for this population is that I work with the kid for an hour a week. I don't really talk to the parent. The kid goes away. I assume whatever he says is true. When he comes back, then we just kind of go through this. What we're looking at is making sure that everyone's included. It says family focused, but it's also like whoever's in the household, making sure that everyone is kind of aware of it. We have to have one caregiver, but we try to meet with any other caregivers in the household. Because what we want to do is make sure the whole family's healthy. There's some case management aspects that we'll do in this part, because we know if like caregivers are stressed about all these other things, and there's some way that we can kind of help work with those things, makes them more able to focus on our issues and kind of work as a whole. Because we want to make sure that everything is healthy, so we can make sure that not only this issue is addressed, but any other issues that we can work with. It's trauma informed. We do know that a large number of the kids that we have had trauma in their history. So if we have kids that have trauma histories that are still unresolved, I'm certified in TOCBT. This model kind of integrates with TOCBT. So I'll work with the kid to make sure that they're working on what's happened to them in the past, but also holding them accountable to their problematic sexual behaviors and making sure that they're getting that assistance too. And also we're doing a multidisciplinary team approach. I'll have Janie talk in just a second more on that. Part of it for me that's great is that it gives us more information. One, it allows us access to this group of kids that we knew were there, but we weren't able to really get from a lot of them from DHR because of prevention cases. If a kid's 13 or under, usually DHR does a prevention case, and there's not much, I guess teeth is the best word, to make sure that kids are getting prevention services or services like ours. So with the multidisciplinary team, when kids in my age range or in our agency's age range come up, we can hopefully provide those services that the kid needs. As well as it gives us updates on how victims are doing, making sure that everyone's getting the help that they need. So Jane, would you like to come talk a little bit about our partnership?
Andrew knows that I talk about my child all the time. He's 21. When he was in 5th grade, and they were gonna do a little talk in the schools. He and his best friend, I was taking him out to eat, because I don't cook. I was taking him out to eat, and I said, well, are y'all ready for tomorrow? And my son David said, well, yeah, Mom, you've been telling me this since I was 2. And his best friend Bradley says, well, I don't know anything. He said, all I know is if you have sex with your cousin, you have babies with 17 heads. 4 hours later, I'm still talking about sex education, okay? And that's what our kids get. They don't know. They don't know what's going on. Before Andrew and I started working together, before this program, I've been at the Children's Center, our contract with them, and I've been at the Children's Center for 23 years. And there was this place called YSI, and nobody on the multidisciplinary team, I've been sitting on the multidisciplinary team for 23 years. Nobody on the multidisciplinary team had a consistent idea of how to get kids help through YSI. Well, it's gotta be court mandated. Well, and then I talked to somebody and I'm like, no, I don't think so. And we're a good MDT. I mean, we've got DA involvement, we've got mental health. We used to have Indian Rivers come in, they're not coming, we're gonna try to get them again. Police, law enforcement, schools, school social workers, DHR. I mean, we all know each other, we all work closely together, but nobody had an idea of really what YSI did and how to get kids there, which is ridiculous that we didn't know that, but we didn't. And then we have kids that were not, like I said earlier, that weren't old enough to be in the juvenile court system. And then DHR has to kind of worry about protecting kids if a younger child has had problematic sexual behaviors, which none of us called it that, we called them young perps or juvenile perps. That we couldn't, they can't make anybody get any services for these kids. And we would, in MDT, we'd be going, we know we're gonna see these kids again. We know we're gonna see them again. So, and another thing that Andrew was talking about with all these people having so many problems, the families, I think it's so good to work with the families, which he does and I do too, because the boundaries are such, boundary issues tend to be pretty pervasive in these families. It's not just that maybe they're not supervised enough, because you can't supervise anybody 24 hours a day, but it may be that they're seeing domestic violence. It may be that they're seeing their parents having sex. It may be that they're watching porn. because they're just not the boundaries. And then I've seen children, I used to contract with a residential treatment facility for boys, and these boys would act out sexually on each other. It was almost the norm. A lot of them had been sexually abused, and they didn't tell because, of course, they were homophobic, so they didn't want to talk about it. So they had all this trauma that hadn't been dealt with, and then they're acting out, and then they're getting in trouble with the juvenile system. There was one boy that I knew that had gone through, not in Tuscaloosa, had gone through the juvenile justice system at 14, no, I'm sorry, at 11, another county, is identified as a sex offender until he is 24 years old, from 11, which I think is horrendous, okay? So anyway, so the Children's Center got, does everybody know what a CAC is? Child Advocacy Center, okay. We got contacted by YSI about this new program and if we'd like to work in coordination with them, and we're like, sure. So I went through the training with Andrew, not all the training that Andrew went through, but I went through to kind of get an idea of what the program was gonna be like, what they're gonna be doing. And so what we do is we have a multidisciplinary team that meets once a month. And we staff all the cases that come to the Children's Center. And anybody on the multidisciplinary team can bring a kid, even if it, like, I'm seeing one that Shannon, who's the DA at the ADA at juvenile court, she referred directly to me, but we can put them under a separate grant, not the MAPS grant, but a separate one. So anybody on MDT can bring kids to our attention. And if there's a child that we think would qualify for the MAPS program, then what happens is Andrew will evaluate them. The kid, the victim, which I don't call my kids victim, but in this situation we have to just to differentiate, would come to me. We've had several different cases. I haven't seen one case now that Andrew was helping to get in because the mom no-showed for 3 times for interviews with us for the victim who was her daughter. But somehow, and I don't know her because I hadn't met her yet, she's hooked in with the son who is the child with problematic sexual behavior. So we're concerned about, is this daughter gonna be protected or whatever? So Andrew has met with the mom and has established a type of relationship with the mom, he hopes. And then he has referred the mom to me because she knows him and trusts him. So now I've got an appointment set up with mom and the daughter, okay? Andrew and I meet once a week to address issues. Another case I've got a kid that really is on the spectrum. Andrew's working with the older child with the problematic sexual behavior. My kid is not ever going to protect himself because my kid just doesn't have the insight. For example, he has been texting Andrew's kid, okay? Nothing inappropriate, but texting, and I said, well, you know, do you need to be doing that? And he's like, well, I'm not seeing him. I'm like, well, what does your mom say? Well, it didn't happen to her. And so I'm like, okay, Andrew, we got a problem here, so we've talked about that. I give Andrew, like in this case that I was just telling you about, the child on the spectrum, he is not going to be able to protect himself. That's not going to happen. Andrew's kid's dad and my kid's mom were dating. We're living together, okay? They're kind of still seeing each other. We've got to figure out, you know, because we're not real sure that Andrew's kid's going to self-monitor. My kid's not going to self-monitor. We're thinking more stuff has happened to my kid than he initially said. So we're kind of wondering what kind of recommendations we're going to have to make. There's no way, if I was working with this kid by myself and I didn't know this child, there's no way that I would have any idea of what to recommend. And I don't think there's any way, if Andrew didn't know that my kid was on the spectrum and is just a little bit, doesn't have any insight into self-protection. That's gonna help him figure out how to work with his kid and the dad, okay? So, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna add one thing, and that's one big part about this that makes it innovative, is that because a large number of the kids that we see, the victims are not, they're not strangers. That whole idea of stranger danger thing just doesn't exist with a huge number of these kids. They're somehow connected, and a large number of them tend to be within the same family. And we've just, for years and years, just kind of thrown our hands up that because neither side knows what the other's doing, for DHR's kind of hands are tied. We don't know what to do with these kids until they reach a certain age, and then they can kind of get back. A thing that I saw with a lot of my kids when I was working with survivors of trauma, some of them would argue that I shouldn't have told, because now they're being told that they can't ever see their brother or sister again. So you have kids who just, they're given partial information. And what we're able to do is, with our communication, is we're able to get more of the full story. For years and years, she got one side of the coin and I got the other, and we weren't putting it together. And now with this program, we're able to put that information together to really do what's best for the entire family. So that was one thing.
And when you, I'm sure all of y'all know this, if y'all are working with these kids, you don't really have a whole lot of time to sit around and figure out what extra stuff you can get yourself to do, because you're going from one person to the next person to the next person, so people fall through the cracks. And it's like, well, actually it was crossing fingers. Well, I hope it doesn't happen again. And I would talk to my kids about telling. Okay, they didn't tell it first. Nobody tells it first. Then they feel guilty about it. I have to work with them about not feeling guilty. And then you talk to them about telling, yet I know that in the future, if something happens to them where that might mean the family splits up again or not, this kid's not gonna tell. They're not gonna tell. And so what we would do is just be crossing our fingers to that maybe something wouldn't happen again. Or simply sitting back thinking, we'll see this kid when he rapes somebody, or, you know, we truly said that in MDT before we had this option available to us, that there's nothing we can do. And that is ridiculous, but there was nothing. And residential treatment facilities, number one, they're not out there to deal with these issues. And number two, they're very expensive. You can't get kids in unless a kid's in foster care. It's very difficult to get any kind of money paid or through juvenile court. But what if they're not, if it's not a serious enough case to go to Mount Mannix? I mean, like this kid, the kids we're talking about would go nowhere and get nothing, because they're not bad enough or severe enough to go to a facility.
And speaking from the foster care side, it's not that easy with foster care.
Absolutely,
Right.
it's not.
Absolutely
It's not.
It's horrible.
You don't have, number one, you don't have the money, and number two, you don't have the facilities that are trained, that have beds open.
Well, and then you've got to factor in too, because, you know, the, most of the public believe that, okay, a kid's acting out, you know their behaviors, and we referenced the recent shooting in Florida. At that time, I was working with 2 kids with serious behaviors that could do something like that. And there was nobody, when you take them, the first step, you know, first thing you have to do is they offend and they're aggressive, and you're supposed to call law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Next step is you take them to the hospital.
Mhm.
Next step is,
And they keep them for 3 days.
no, no,
Maybe,
no.
Maybe,
do that.
they even let them in.
No.
They want to.
They evaluate them, and their behaviors have stabilized, and they see no aggressive behaviors. So they say, 4 hours max, and they say you have to take them home. And one of the cases was an 18-year-old, and I was telling the mother, And the therapist was telling the mother, when the hospital said you have to come and get him, I said, don't do it. Let them, he's 18. That didn't work so well because then they threatened to have her arrested for abandonment. And so
It's
we.
just a vicious cycle.
Yes,
It
and
is.
that's our point. So, you know, we're with you on this, but the solutions are going to be in somebody that is trained well enough to recognize and treat these traumas and not say they don't exist.
Exactly.
And just because they're not exhibiting these behaviors, because number one of the kids I was dealing with likes to go to the hospital. So they will become
A lot of
aggressive
secondary danger
just
to
so
them.
they can go there, because guess what? While they're there for that 4 hours, they're getting everything they want.
A lot of attention.
They are having fun.
I'm gonna do that too.
Yeah.
I need
And
that.
we
I
need
a
that
lot of
vacation,
stuff.
yes, we need that
I
vacation.
wanna go sleep in a bed.
Yeah, me too, and let them bring me all the food. So you can sort of see that we're nurturing those behaviors in some ways.
Yeah.
And then, you know, for regardless of whether, and that's the point, it doesn't matter, because even if the child is in foster care, and these two were not, but some that we know are, and it is, I see it equally as difficult on every side of it.
And that's and that is
That's
the
the hard
only
part.
way,
Yes.
I mean, that or multi-needs, which,
Multi-needs, I've served on that, and I think it's an excellent resource.
but they
but
don't
you
have
still-
any money.
And you still got the same outcome.
Exactly.
You're going to
Exactly.
make your recommendations, and then you're terrified to send them to some of the places for treatment because you know what you just described is going to happen. They are going to learn how to perpetrate even more.
Well, and part of the thing that we have here is that a large number of the kids that we deal with problematic sexual behaviors, if they have an adequate amount of supervision at home, I know, if we have that, the huge portion of them can be dealt with, if you will, in treatment in the, an outpatient setting. So one of the things that we do at MDT.
And I don't disagree with that, but I'm just telling you, from life experiences, and we are supervising right now, and, one of our kids, and, you know, 24/7 is what it takes, 24/7.
Yeah.
You know
But
what
then
that
you
means.
gotta have somebody like Andrew who understands all this
Oh, and we
treatment
do, we've got
that I
some
know
excellent
about.
people.
I know about, but it's not my specialty. It's
But
not-
we've got excellent folks involved with this particular case, not everybody is that privileged. And that's what worries me, because if you've got somebody out there that's trying desperately to get these folks involved, that's what we need to be training people on. How do we get access to this? How do we get in?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
I've been
these
looking
hours-
into cloning, but I don't
That's
think
what I
it's
was
an
gonna
option
say, you
right
know.
now.
Now, we've got some awesome folks.
And
Now,
we
don't
have-
let me, you know, I don't want you to get that impression that we
Okay.
don't, because as most of you know, if you're familiar at all with DHR, you know that they've got their behavioral analysis headed up by Sabrina Franks, which do an awesome job. But there's 8 of them to cover the state.
It's
Well,
ridiculous.
and we have, and I'll have, in their packet is our like basic information, you can call our office. We have someone that deals with these behaviors up in your area.
Oh, I know about that. That's, but my thing is, there's not enough, and there's not
Yeah.
enough that understand trauma base
And I agree.
and how
Right.
to deal with it.
And I think that's actually something, the representative was talking about
Chris.
earlier.
Yeah.
Yes. Is I think that it's an important thing
Chris,
that we
yeah, I
have to.
know him well, and he and I served on a governor's task force together. Those were some things we looked at, but we still don't have that solution.
Yeah.
I'm hearing about solutions and not a great job you folks do. I'm out in the black belt, and if you're over 16 and have a mental health or substance abuse problem, you get a jail cell. We have no mental health professional available, no nurse or psychiatrically trained nurse. If you're under 16, you better get yourself abused, because that's about the only other way we're gonna get your resources.
If we can get this.
And that's what we're talking about.
If we can get this across the state, the multidisciplinary approach is excellent. because I don't know everything, even though I used to work at DHR. I don't know everything DHR does, because I worked at them when they were DPS.
It is excellent, but you know, you have to have, again, the need of at least 2 agencies
Exactly.
and the threat of being removed from your home.
Yes, and there's
So
stuff.
And you're talking about
The multi-needs
Multi-needs.
or multidisciplinary.
Yeah, well, with multidisciplinary, we don't have any money to pay for any services.
Yeah.
But what we do is we get together and just staff everything,
And look
okay?
at the
But
resources.
then, if I get a kid that before Andrew, like before YSI, if I get a kid that is sexually acting out on one of my kids, okay? Well, the CACs don't allow
No, perpetrators.
offenders
They call them perpetrators still in some
yes,
areas.
own the property.
No.
So I can't see this kid,
Even
even
if
though
they're
I
five.
could probably work with this kid. 5 minutes. Okay, I'm done.
I actually have questions about MEPS. Can you describe the difference between, this is the same thing that I've heard, but these are ongoing questions with me. You talk a lot about problematic sexual behaviors and illegal sexual behaviors, and you're focusing on problematic sexual behaviors. Explain to me the difference.
What the big difference is for most places in here is age is really the difference for a huge number of those.
But what, so it's not illegal, it's just problematic if you're under a certain age.
Well, it's because of my understanding of the law is that they're not prosecuted under the age of
12,
12.
right?
So that's the definition
Well, now,
that
they
they're
can
using.
be, if somebody goes before the judge and gets some bumped up, depending on the severity of the behaviors, because we've had that happen, but it doesn't happen often.
Technically, under Alabama law, a
Right.
12-year-old is not
No.
competent to be a defendant.
So that's what we're splitting it by, is that it's, what I said earlier, it's like the similar behaviors that happen under 12, they're problematic, and illegal behaviors are problematic as well, but the difference is that now they're of an age that they can be prosecuted. Does that make sense?
Yes, it seems like you're focusing more on, like, I guess what I'm saying is what won't you take? You seem to take everything if it's under 14. So, like a legit forcible stranger rape, how are you gonna treat that different than, a family member that is learning weird sexual behavior because of a pattern of abuse?
The difference, we'll do the assessment that you know we'll do. Depending on the severity of it, if we don't feel like they're safe in the community, we can recommend inpatient if it's got a juvenile court involvement. But depending on the level, what we do is ours is a manualized treatment that's similar to TFCBT. What we'll do, it's set up in the 18 sessions. We focus on sexual behavior rules, or kind of like our basis, because the majority of our kids, they need some level of understanding of what they can't do, and I can kind of go over that real quick. So it's not okay to touch other people's private parts. They all deal with private parts. It's not okay to touch other people's private parts, and they're in your packet information.
It's the last page.
Did you get shown one?
No, I know that. But like if you have, you know, I guess what I'm asking is that in my experience seeing, in my life, I've never seen more sex cases than when I've become a juvenile, and that's in 15 years of doing violent crime. So I see the ones that are obviously coming from, I have been perpetrated on, I'm now perpetrating. Ones that are so intellectually deficient that they found their wiener and they just want to play with it and touch it all the time. And then it moves into strangers and multiple victims and grooming and legit force. And it seems, I guess my question is that are you treating them differently? Like if you're taking one of my rape cases against my will, but if you're taking them, how are you treating a stranger forcible rape versus somebody who was raped by their father and is now perpetrating on a sister.
One of the differences is gonna be if there's a stranger involved, it actually won't fit under our criteria for the MAPS program. It goes to the CFC program.
But you recommended one
To go,
to MAPS, that's what I'm trying to understand.
okay, from the records that I have, all of my kids that I've represented for MAPS have known that